Hey there, and welcome back to Up Next in Commerce. I'm Stephanie Postles, your host and the CEO of Mission.org. So we all know that some fashion just never goes out of style. Or if it does for a brief moment, it'll be back again pretty soon. But what about marketing strategies? On today's episode, Jim Davis, who's the Chief Customer Officer at Buck Mason, shares how some old school marketing efforts like direct mail and catalogs may be very relevant for direct-to-consumer brands today. Plus, tune in to hear Jim's take on what the future of emerging brands will look like. But before we jump into this interview, I want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor, Salesforce Commerce Cloud, who just put out the second edition State of Commerce report. For tons of insights from thousands of industry leaders, check out the second edition State of Commerce report at sfdc.co/commerce insights. That's sfdc.co/commerce insights, all one word. All right, let's jump into this episode. Jim, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so you were calling in from Nebraska, right?
Yes.
Have you always lived there, or maybe where did you grow up? I want to hear about like early days and understand where you came from.
Yeah, I'm originally from Florida. I grew up at Daytona Beach, and probably a lot of weight, a lot of hair ago. I was a surfer and stuff like that. And
Nice.
then started moving all over the country for various career opportunities and things like that. I actually was living in Santa Barbara, California before I moved to Omaha. And someone convinced me to leave Santa Barbara to come here and then left me at the job that I was at. So.
Wait, what? They left you? What do you mean?
Yeah, so it was an old friend of mine from a different company back when I worked at Dell. It was a guy that I worked with there, and he convinced me to come to Omaha, Nebraska to work at Omaha Steaks and kind of help me run the consumer business from Santa Barbara, where I was, I loved living there and I was doing quite well. It was sort of an interesting career opportunity. And 3 months after I started here, he quit and went off to do this next thing. It kind of left me hanging. So.
Man, it'd be great if he went to Santa Barbara. Was like, this wasn't really a great decision. So in your earlier days of your career, maybe like when you were coming out of school, what did you think you were going to be doing?
So I went to grad school for 3 years with the intention of being a math professor.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
I pursued the PhD, and just kind of got sick of school, to be honest with you, after about 3 years, and decided to leave before I finished the degree. Probably regret number one in life. I don't know, but it would have been a very different trajectory had I done that, obviously. But it was sort of a weird time in the U.S. economy. It was in the early 90s, and the job market wasn't awesome. So I actually taught high school for a few years. And I am a horrible high school teacher, so got out of that. One of my best friends has been doing it since 1990. And he's one of the best teachers I've ever met in my life, which is sort of my sounding board for how poor I am at that. But so I had some opportunities because of the degree in math and some real world experience I had using it to go off and work in the investment industry for a little while at a small quant firm, kind of running research for this small business in Central Florida. I learned how to use databases and write SQL and do modeling and a bunch of other things along the way. And I had someone offer me what sounded like a great job to go build response models for direct mail, which I had no idea at the time what that meant, in 1998. And moved to South Florida and work at a cruise line. It sounded, exotic and fabulous.
Yeah.
So I did it. And it was kind of an interesting experience because they were one of the first cruise lines in the late 90s. Everyone was still buying cruises through travel agents and things like that, and things like Booking.com and Travelocity didn't exist back then. And we were trying to sell directly to consumers through our website, through our call center. And it was a great idea and a great model that obviously came to fruition later, but they were way too early in the process. All the travel agents gave up on them and badmouthed the cruise line, and they ended up going bankrupt.
Whoa. Okay.
So,
But that was kind of your first dipping your toe in the marketing world.
that was my first marketing job. So I was basically helping them use their customer data and prospect data to go find new passengers, to take advantage of the passengers that we had and all the data that we knew about them. and figure out what the right ways to attract them to book another cruise would be, either through direct mail or email or outbound calling activity, and create optimized contact strategies to use those three channels in particular, with direct mail and outbound calling being the more expensive ones, to figure out how to retain customers and get new ones. Yeah.
So how do you see from what you were doing back then? I mean, I hear what you're saying you're doing, and I'm like, oh, that's still very relevant
Yep.
today. It's not,
Yeah.
it's not something like, oh yeah, now we have these new things and you don't really do that anymore. What do you see in the world today when it comes to using those channels compared to back then?
I think that the sophistication and the level of personalization that's possible, if done well in all three of those channels, plus many more digital channels, has significantly improved. I think what you can know about a consumer, either through third-party purchase data or just by observing their interactions with you and your properties in a more detailed way than was possible back then, can give you more insight into how you should approach them, and when they might be actually in market for the product or service that you're trying to, convince them to buy from you, basically. So those are the pieces that I think have improved along the way. Because I came into the world through an analytics viewpoint, I think that a lot of people, especially sort of in the 2010s time frame, with digital marketing and paid search and things like that, were sort of the core of how people were starting to do most of their marketing. They approached it very differently than some of us older folks did, because we had been doing the same kind of analytics about who to talk to about what, when, in non-real-time bidding strategy kind of environments. And so there was a lot of optimization required to ensure that you were kind of optimizing that marketing expense. But it turns out that all that stuff about lifetime value analysis and figuring out whether or not it was worth bidding on me versus bidding on my neighbor, when they were looking for, cruise lines to the or cruises to the Caribbean, the same kind of mathematics applied. You just had to figure out how to scale it faster and apply it to a lot more opportunities than kind of the print world or the outbound calling world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Although now, what do you think about direct mail? That's been like an interesting conversation on this show around. Some people are betting like big on it again.
Yeah.
And I don't know, how do you feel about that?
So I'm the guy who convinced the CEO at Urban Outfitters to kill the catalog.
Okay.
So
you feel pretty strongly then, maybe?
but that was, I was marketing to 19-year-olds in 2012, and I do think the world has changed. And I think that very much like what happened with SMS marketing, I think SMS marketing kind of had this huge surge back in kind of 2010, 2011, and everybody thought it was going to be the next big thing. And then it kind of died for a while, and now it's back. I think people engage with it more. I think the same thing's happening with print to some degree. We seem like we're getting back to the point that we were at back in the early 2000s, where people are starting to overmail their customers and potential prospects again now.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot more competition, because now all of these small DTC brands have sort of, either on their own or through various agencies that they're working with, discovered the channel. And so I get a stack of catalogs this day, probably twice a week, right? That's kind of like what it was back in the 90s, when there were tons of catalog direct companies out there. But I use it at Buck Mason. I think it's a very effective channel. I think that it's still somewhat questionable as an effective acquisition channel when you reach a certain size, when your customer base gets to be a certain size and you've kind of penetrated all of those cooperative databases out there to a certain degree. I think the acquisition opportunity starts to erode pretty quickly at a certain point. But as a retention tool, and just kind of keeping people engaged with the business in a more tactile way, I still think it has a lot of value. And I think you need to not think about catalogs the way people did 20 years ago, where that was the store and you paginate the catalog based off of how you want people to buy or what you want them to buy. I think it should be a little bit more kind of inspiration, and really just driving people to come into your shop or go to your website and kind of check out more, basically.
Yeah. I mean, what's nice is that you've kind of been able to see the transformation of things like direct mail. Do you ever feel like you look around and it's like, history's just like repeating itself, and you're like, guys, I mean, with all these like new D2C founders out there being like, whoa, we can mail people, like, I mean, to me, I'm like, that's a pretty novel concept, and you kind of just
Yeah.
forget that, what it used to look like. But do you feel like people aren't really learning except unless you've been there before?
It is kind of interesting, the conversations you have with founders, for instance. I did a little stint during the pandemic where I was consulting with a few different companies, and people who are just trying to do direct mail or catalog for the first time have no concept of things like segmentation strategies and kind of contact frequency strategies if you're going to mail a lot, how offers and covers may impact what you're doing in the same way that kind of the lead image in an email might impact your click rates and things like that, because they just never grew up in that world where like that was the only thing that you were marketing. I mean, I used to, when I was at Office Depot, we used to send that crazy 900-page reference book for everything you could buy from Office Depot. And there were people that had put little Post-it notes in that thing. You could tell, because back then everybody used to track performance by putting a prefix on SKUs. So if you order with this SKU, I knew that it came out of this catalog basically versus another SKU. We had people that had held on to those things for 5 or 8 years because we could tell by the SKUs that they were ordering from when they would call in or go to the website and things like that. And it's obviously not like that anymore, but I think that the mechanisms around how to get people interested, if you're getting that stack, like I was saying, it's 3 inches high in your mailbox a few times a week, what's going to make people stop at yours when they're just sifting through it to throw it in the recycling bin probably and things like that. And then once you get them to open it, what's going to keep them engaged? What's going to make them want to leave it on their coffee table for a while and kind of keep it around for a few weeks and things like that.
Yeah. I always think, have you seen Trader Joe's pamphlet? Like to
Yeah.
me, like that's great storytelling. Whoever's writing that,
Yeah.
you actually want to read it. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
fun. And then of course you're like, okay, I need these ingredients to go with this,
Right.
fun story and dish that they just created. I think that's like a good example of something I want to read versus I oftentimes will get this B2B magazine for all these. I mean, it is kind of like an Office Depot type magazine, but they're like, here's
Yeah.
all the things your company might need. It's 100 pages. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
I'm not, no. I like every time I'm like, that is not how we operate anymore. I don't want everything in this magazine. And it's like really random, like hardware pieces to like fans. And I don't know. There's no personalization in that one.
There was a word that was being used for a while, probably like around like 2008 to 2012 or 13, called magalog. And the idea is that it was supposed to be that kind of perfect blend of storytelling and commerce, and it's sort of that holy grail that everybody looks for, I think, in their website experiences of content and commerce kind of coming together in a really interesting way, so people don't even really understand that you're selling to them and that they're about to buy something. All of a sudden they're just like giving their credit card information or whatever, and oops, it happened. And I think it kind of came in and went away, but I think some of the best catalogs that I see today are good blends of that. Not in I don't know if you're familiar with J. Peterman, but yeah, it's an old catalog, and if you ever look at one of those, they're small. They usually mail in what's called a digest format now, but there's these like fantastic tales of why this piece of clothing came to be, like some safari in
That's
Africa.
great.
And they used to make fun of Jay Peterman on Seinfeld all the time back in the day. So, but he's still around, and I still see a Jay Peterman catalog. That's sort of like the one extreme of kind of telling stories. But I think that the people that have done a better job, I think the Trader Joe's example is a good one. I think that Dollar Shave Club with some of the inserts that they have, and it is sort of like 13-year-old boy humor, but it's funny and engaging. And back before they got bought out, I think it kind of went beyond the razor and the razor blade for them, and kind of kept you engaged in the brand a little bit and stuff like that. I think that brands can probably do a lot more of that kind of stuff. It's expensive to do print, even when it's an insert. So you need to make the most out of it, and it needs to be an engaging piece of content and not just a piece of advertising somebody wants to throw away. So.
Yeah. So when it comes to storytelling, I feel like you're probably pretty good at it when I look at your history. I mean, you rebranded the image of some pretty iconic brands. Uggs is one of them I saw
Yeah.
that, you came in and rebranded it so Uggs weren't ugly, which I thought was funny because that was such a such a theme for a while. Like everyone thought it was ugly until they weren't anymore. And all of a sudden now they're
Yeah.
super cool. I want to hear what that looks like when you come into a company and you are trying to help them turn around the image of like basically their entire company. Same with Lucky. I think you did that with Lucky brand too, coming in and trying to make it cool again.
Yeah, I mean, I think the UGG story is an interesting one because it's obviously a brand that for a certain generation was like the it boot for a while,
Hmm.
especially during kind of the early half of the 2000s. And then what happened was is they sort of went out of vogue with younger consumers, but they still had this very, very strong core base that just kind of stayed with them. So a lot of brands have that happen to them, right? And their customer base ages with them. And so the problem is not one of, quality of product or anything having to do with the items themselves having changed. There were some structural issues with the company and things like over distribution. Like scarcity matters. And if you see an UGG boot everywhere you go, including what you consider to be a pretty down, kind of down market shoe store or something like that, I think it makes you think about the brand very differently.
Hmm.
So, and I'm not going to say I'm responsible for all of this stuff. There was a collection of people at Deckers at the time that were trying to reinvigorate the UGG brand that all had really good ideas. But I think the big tent poles were make it a little bit more scarce, make sure that you're only selling it at places that you feel like have the same kind of consumer equivalence to the level of luxury that we felt like the footwear we were making was, kind of step one, clean up distribution.
Hmm.
The other one is, who is it that you're trying to go after? And so we did a lot of market research around who the boot and the slipper might still resonate with that was in this younger group of consumers that we had sort of, lost traction with. And I think that some really interesting things emerged there. At the time, back in 2015, the Timberland Yellow Boot was still sort of like the predominant piece of footwear that you would see amongst many, many hip hop artists. But there was this substrate that had turned on to this boot UGG was making called the New Mel. And it was very tiny at the time. There was a little bit of hit in social media around it, but we kind of hung on to that and in a background sort of way, working with publishers like Complex and, even doing a booth at Complex Con one year, started to find relevance with that community in a very authentic way without changing what we were doing, but just trying to understand what they found interesting about it and try to deliver more of that basically. And that strategy started to work. The big unlock was, when Andrea, who took over as the brand president, really wanted to make that explode, though, and convinced everybody we needed to invest more in working with personalities that would kind of lead us down that path further. We were making a lot of inroads, but I think that big unlock when you start working with like, Lil Nas X and stuff like that completely changed the business. And so it's a making sure that you understand who your audience is that you're trying to go after and what they're going to find appealing, and not trying to do the members only jacket thing and just hold on to the 80s nostalgia and stuff like that about your brand, but find out what's next for it, but keeping the fundamentals of the product integrity and quality intact as you do it, basically.
I mean, that is still interesting thinking about PE firms. Like, how do you feel about when
Yeah.
you see a brand being owned by a PE firm? To me, that's always like, oh, that's a little scary, bad sign. I don't know. But I mean, you've been in
I
this.
think generally, the history of PE firms buying brands means that they're either looking for a way to bleed a bunch of profit out of it for about a decade, or they want to figure out how they can cut costs so that there can be some kind of an equity event and they can get, 10 times their money back or whatever the multiple is that they're searching for. There are more strategic firms out there these days, though, that seem to be putting groups of businesses together and giving them the capital that they need to be able to grow in a more sustainable way and not have to sort of, do what businesses like Allbirds did, where they grew really, really fast, probably got way out in front of their skis. And now when you look at their valuation and how much it dropped off even before, the calamity going on in the stock market over the last couple of months, You could tell that there was a lot of vaporware there, right?
Hmm.
And as a guy who used to work in the footwear business, I sensed that all along with them. I thought they had some really good things they were doing, but then because they had so much VC money and there was this pressure to kind of get big fast and garner a high valuation, I think they lost track of who they were as a brand and as a business.
Hmm.
And kind of ended up with nothing at the end of the day. And maybe they'll survive and maybe they won't. But I think that there are some PE firms out there that are doing some more interesting things in businesses where it's like, this business is profitable. If I can help it with, these types of back office kind of infrastructure things, or help them be more sophisticated in certain ways, they can probably continue to be profitable in this fashion without having to completely blow, their costs, their acquisition costs and other things like that. And they can have a very long runway as a business and not have to continue to grow 25% every year, for
Yep.
3 or 4 years in a row. 10 to 15% growth is fine. And I think the firm that owns Taylor Stitch, I think, is a good example of that. There's a few others out there that they're taking that kind of a model. I think I appreciate that. It's kind of like what strategics like in a scene of retail used to try to do, I think.
Hmm.
But I think most of the strategics are now kind of more like the old PE firms used to be. Like you look at what Spark is doing with all of those kind of quasi defunct brands they bought, like Forever 21, Lucky Brand, and Brooks Brothers and stuff like that. I mean, the real emphasis there is to just try to make the mall properties still be full so that it looks like, they have full tenancy in all of these Simon properties and things like that. And then the other part of partnership, if all those businesses go bankrupt, they own all the licensing for it. So it's a
Yep.
harvesting deal at the end of the day.
Yeah. So, okay, when looking at the environment today, before we jump to Buck Mason, I want to kind
Mm,
of hear how do you view this landscape? Because I mean, I've heard so many different opinions on this show around what's about to come with all these
mm,
D2C companies. You're saying that you've spotted kind of trouble with like the Allbirds and companies like that who are maybe forced to grow quickly. And you see that in the world of VC of, I'll invest in you and you need to return the fund. And now I'm going to
right.
own so much of your company that like there's less incentives for the founders to even keep trying. Like, what do you think is to come for the next couple years in like the world of commerce?
I mean, I think that the the pure DTC company and its ability to sort of bring a product to market and grow without, having a lot of play in marketplaces like Amazon, is going to be far harder for the next 10 years than it was for the previous 10 years, mostly because acquisition costs and ease of acquisition that was largely facilitated in the Facebook ecosystem is evaporating as quickly as you can imagine, right? So the ability to just acquire a bunch of new customers and create awareness is going to become much more difficult, which means that a lot of these guys are going to have to try to figure out how to have some kind of wholesale relationships or go right to marketplace earlier in their life cycles than they have today. And when you look at some of the businesses like Viore out there, where they sort of have that blend of, doing some wholesale and doing their own stores and a very successful website. That probably in the short term is going to be the more natural model. But I think if department store shakeout continues to happen and even Nordstroms of the world struggle more, they're not going to have that avenue either. And so it feels more like what's happening in Europe and Asia to me, where finally in North America, marketplaces are going to kind of take over. Here, it's predominantly Amazon, but I think that when you look at some of the entrants that have gotten a strong foothold in other places like Zalando in Europe, who just bought, Complex, by the way, they just bought a publisher, which is a weird kind of
Hmm.
synergy if you think about it,
Interesting.
right? And then all the Alibaba properties in Asia, I think that that is kind of the future of commerce in general and not just digital commerce. It's already there for all of the beauty startups and a lot of the CPG startups, right? Like when they talk about DTC businesses, they're really talking about marketplace businesses and Target, Walmart, and Amazon. I think that it will start to leak into the other sectors as we go through the next 5 to 10 years. So,
Mhm. So how can maybe if a brand is just, early days today, how would you advise them when thinking about, their go-to-market strategy or, how should they even think about that now?
yeah, I mean, I said all that. It's like it's the doom and gloom of marketplace hell, right? But the I think the reality is though is that some businesses can still come to market, and if they're offering a unique and interesting and compelling omnichannel experience backed up by very, very strong product that's differentiated in some meaningful way in the marketplace and not just chasing trend. And, in the case of apparel in particular, there's got to be something else there that's that really strong point of view that they have that they feel like is completely defensible and they can build a moat around it. But I think in-store experience and that high level of experience is still something that can exist, and not only in that kind of department store environment, or luxury department store. So I do believe that if you're able to figure out how to have a strong omni-channel sort of business strategy right out of the gate, and you're thinking about your website, your own stores, and then probably some combination of wholesale and or what your marketplace play is, and you've built your business plan around when to layer in different things and how to create differentiation of product offering, so that some of those channels are probably always rolling back in some way to your core DTC offering. DTC still has a place in the world, but you have to
Mhm.
think about those other opportunities as key points of acquisition that,
Yep.
you want to be able to have, because it'll end up being cheaper than what's going to happen with, the other avenues of digital acquisition going forward, most likely.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it seems like we were in a place, of course, where any founder could really start a company and, try and sell anything, even if it didn't
Right.
really exist. And now it's moving to a place where it feels like you do have to kind of tackle everything at once. Like you have to work on the wholesale while working on the product, while thinking about your logistics and supply chain. And
Yeah.
it seems like the world's actually getting like harder, at least here in the US, to start a company and
Yeah.
moving to a place where maybe VC money is needed. Whereas for, the past couple years, you've actually seen VCs pull back and DTC founders being like, that's fine. We're still going to launch our company and we don't need
Right.
a bunch of money to launch. It feels like it's getting trickier now to be a new founder in the world of commerce, being like, I want to launch with this kind of brand.
I think especially if you're making any kind of tactile good, if you're a services or SaaS company and those kind of things, I think the runway is still different. I do believe that even those companies are going to start getting impacted by higher costs of acquisition, because many of them were very reliant, even in the B2B space, on pretty strong, pretty inexpensive digital marketing capabilities that
Hmm.
I think are starting to erode across the board.
Yep.
But yeah, I think anybody that's trying to make clothing or other types of hard goods and things like that, it probably is going to require some kind of investment, because I think the capital to start something up is going to change, because you're going to have some kind of physical presence and or a staff that can help you, do things like sell into wholesale accounts
Hmm.
and or kind of manage marketplaces in an effective way. And there are plenty of kind of great agency relationships in the world that you can have to get those kind of things started, but they all cost money.
Yep.
So,
Yep, I agree. All right, so now we can jump to where you're at today. Buck
yeah,
Mason, a company that as far as I know, did not take VC money. They turned down a Shark Tank offer because I
yeah,
think they were asking for a lot of equity from their company.
yeah,
So this is a company that's been focused, from what I think, on profitability, and making the best t-shirts in the very beginning.
yeah.
For anyone who doesn't know, first, can you tell them what is Buck Mason and then what drew you to this company?
Yeah, so Buck Mason is coming up on 10 years old. It'll be 10 years old next year. And it was founded by a couple of guys who were neighbors but didn't really know each other that well in Venice, California. And they would like see each other to say hi and things like that and stuff. But through a third party that knew both of them, kind of got connected up to actually have a conversation about doing something together. They initially thought the business would be more of a kind of a outfit in a box kind of thing. They had this idea of selling like a pair of jeans and a few T-shirts or something like that. It was like a box deal, and you would just order that, and we would send it to you. But they became very obsessed with building a great T-shirt at a good value and making it right in LA, which they ended up, that became kind of the iconic curved hem slope T-shirt that we sell today. You roll the clock forward, in a few years into that, they started to bolster their design and operations and sourcing capabilities, and really were able to start offering more head to toe dressing, in multiple categories. T-shirts is still the largest category within the business. And, we still take pride in the core T-shirts that we've always made, but we're also always looking at introducing new fabrics and new ideas that we can bring to the core T-shirt line, to keep it interesting, but also to kind of keep pushing the envelope on what a T-shirt can be, quite honestly, with, some cool things that we do about using heavier yarns, even though it's a short sleeve tee that people love, and who knew in the middle of summer they want to wear a heavier T-shirt. And, interesting things like cotton hemp, mixed yarns and things like that we've developed. But the amount of share of closet that we can now have because of, the stance that we've taken around developing really iconic outerwear pieces and jackets. Some really interesting unstructured suiting. We call the carry-on suit that we introduced last year. And then also just, everything that you can imagine in button downs that would take you to the office or just for a nice casual evening out and stuff like that. You can buy all of that from Buck Mason now. So within the span of a short few years, we became a real player in menswear outside of just the jeans and T-shirt business. It's kind of funny if you go look at old pictures of the first store in New York. It actually, on the windows for years, had painted letters on it that said jeans and T-shirts sold here.
That's great.
And that was kind of, and they literally just had, somebody come up and paint that on the windows, right? But it's more than that now, which creates complexity in the business. And then the other thing that we did, in 2021 is we introduced a women's line, starting with T-shirts, because that was our kind of core expertise. And that grew very, very quickly. And now the women's line, starting this spring, is introduced, sweaters and dresses and bottoms and shorts, lots of different top opportunities, both in button down and knit tops and things like that. So we feel like that, the goal here at the end of the day is to create the next great American apparel brand and fill the void that was left by a lot of, companies like J. Crew, and Polo, honestly, that have left both in the menswear business, but we also think in terms of like iconic women's wear, have kind of left this void in the women's wear business as well.
Yep, that's awesome. Okay, so I'm sure you're thinking about those other companies, the J. Crews of the world. What do you see that they didn't do? Like, why aren't they more, why didn't they create an iconic brand that maybe they should have? That I think J. Crew actually had like a really good chance of doing.
They did, and I think that they probably were there. Obviously, Polo did, right? I mean, when you look at where Polo is and was, and the various iterations and sub brands of it, like the Laurel and things like that, there's a lot to learn from there. I think on the J. Crew front, it feels like they probably lost their way a little bit in the sense of making sure that the quality of what they were bringing to market and making sure that they weren't getting out in front of what the demand was for what they were doing. And then, once you do that, you get into this endless cycle of having to be on sale because you have too much inventory to deal with. And so you have to have a sale, and then next year you have to comp that sale. And then, it just becomes this, tower of downward spiral that dilutes your brand value in the eyes of consumers, because now they're just going to sit around and wait for the next sale, right? We don't do that. And I think, you combine the sort of historical references with which we draw on to inspire our designs, coupled with, being very attuned to making products that will last, and expecting that you're going to have like this polo I'm wearing in your closet for many years to come. It's not something you bought this year, and after you wash it 3 or 4 times, isn't wearable anymore. It actually looks better the more you wash it because of the dyeing processes that we use and things like that. Um, that I think is where businesses like J. Crew probably either never found their way or lost their way, but we stay completely committed to that as one of the core pillars of the brand.
That's awesome. I didn't know about the historical reference piece. Like, can you tell
Yeah.
me what that looks like, or what are you tying back to?
Yeah, so the design team, and the head of design here, I think, is largely responsible for his name's Kyle Fitzgibbons, is largely responsible for, our forward lean in this area. But they do a lot of research when they're looking at, if we want to make a leather jacket, what are the iconic kind of Americana leather jackets that men have worn over the decades? And where is the time period where like that first thing that everybody really loved, like that first moto or that first bomber jacket, what did it look like? What was the very first one that then everybody copied later?
Hmm.
And we'll actually go out and acquire not only, images and things like that, but to the degree that we can actually get vintage items and stuff.
Oh, cool.
We'll go out and acquire that, and the team will figure out, okay, so this is what they created. What is sort of the modern person's version of that article or that garment? And how do we start to go about designing that? And what are some features that maybe, the guy in 1948 didn't necessarily think about or need that maybe the guy in 2022 does, so that we can update a little bit, but stay as true to what the original intent of that garment was. And a lot of things in our line, came to be that way. And on the women's side, it's not a different process. It's just different decades of reference in terms of, where we want to draw on, for, how the modern woman can dress. But do it in a way so that you're not chasing trend or chasing fashion, which is how that item is going to be able to live in your closet season after season, right? Because
Hmm.
it was never, and it's not that it's not fashionable, like that's obviously not the right way to say it. It's that it's sort of timeless, and that's what we're always looking for. Is there are timeless elements of every man and woman's wardrobe that they can always own, and we want to have 100% share of that for them, basically.
Yeah. Oh, that's a very cool process. I didn't know that was what was happening behind the
Yeah.
scenes. Do you ever feel like you guys will run out of something? I mean, after you go through so many decades, you're like, all right, I got the best, white button-up tee and the high-waisted jeans and whatever.
I mean, I think that there's the element of, you can kind of keep selling, the core articles over and over and over again. The existing consumer may want it in a different color if it's something like, polos again, or jeans, or an interesting chino or something like that, or an interesting short dress. And then on the new product development side, there's a lot of untapped things out there that we haven't really, kind of gotten into yet that we could. And there's a whole area of slightly more luxurious goods, that we probably, could start to explore a little bit more. And you'll see some of that in upcoming seasons, including this fall from Buck Mason. And so that's a whole avenue that I think is completely unexplored in the business. And I think the design team would agree with that, which is why they're kind of looking in that direction. There's also, the workwear inspired areas of American sportswear that, are somewhat unexplored by us. And we feel like we can do it better than the Dickies and the Carhartts of the world because of our process.
Hmm.
So,
That's great. So what drew you to the company? Like, what did you see that you were like, I can come in and help you guys a lot?
yeah, I mean, the they had accomplished a lot and created this really interesting, very profitable business that hadn't really matured to the point that certain processes, like what gets referred to as go-to-market processes. So, when you create apparel or shoes or anything really, there's the design ideas that start way back at the beginning, but really even ahead of that, there's financial considerations or growth ideas or consumer relevance conversations that you need to be having so that you can figure out how you start to create a line that aligns to an audience that you feel like you really want to own from a market share perspective. And then after design starts their part of the process, you have to figure out how you're going to go to market. And even though we have fairly simple, distribution opportunities at the Buck Mason stores or, buckmason.com, you still have to figure out timing and assortment and what your marketing strategies are going to be and your positioning and your creative and your brand presentation. And those can alter a little bit depending on the line and the season. And so helping sort of build that bigger process around how we go to market, and then starting to bring more intelligence and a little bit more kind of analytic acumen into things like new website enhancements, the way that we invest our marketing dollars, the channels that we choose to be in, how we move money around between channels when things are or aren't working in a really dynamic way to kind of optimize expenses and stuff like that, or the pieces I thought I could kind of add value in.
Got it. So where are you investing your marketing dollars? I know before we started recording, you were like, the world's kind of changing and a lot of the digital marketing activities that we've all relied on are not really going to keep working. What are you building right now to prepare for the future we're in right now?
So we're lucky in, strategic. I think it's, it's a combination of both in that we have a pretty strong PR activity that, the way kind of PR morphed over the last decade or so is that a lot of publishers are out there just sort of like writing about things that they can earn affiliate commission on, right? So, take your pick of your favorite publications, but those listicles, the brands end up paying some percentage back to the publishers, right? But we have a very strong business in that. It creates a fairly consistent traffic and revenue stream for our .com throughout the year, and actually is driving some store traffic based off of post-purchase surveys and things like that as well. So I'm looking at how do we sort of bolster that maybe even more to supplement some of what we're losing out on in kind of the Facebook world, while we start to test into other avenues that would be net new for us, like podcast marketing. As well as, testing new spaces like TikTok. We'll start running our first TikTok ads probably early July. And I think that social isn't dead necessarily, but it may be time to kind of move on to what the next channel set is. So we'll look at Snap, we'll look at TikTok, and we'll continue to optimize what we do in the Facebook environment and things like that. We still believe in our catalogs from a print perspective on the retention side of marketing, not so much on the acquisition side. And then I think we need to start exploring some things that are kind of outside of our comfort zone from the kinds of content that we have created historically, which means for us thinking about stronger video content, some of it more polished that could live in things like, connected TV spaces for streaming ads and stuff like that. And going a little bit further up the funnel and trying to create a little bit more kind of mid-funnel awareness type of advertising that's still somewhat product focused and not just straight brand advertising. And, we're not going to ignore where there might be opportunities with distribution to help, be those new avenues of acquisition, wholesale included. So.
Cool. Well, it sounds like an exciting future and a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
And thanks for coming on the show today, Jim, and sharing everything that you're up to. Where can people follow along with your journey and say hi?
Yeah, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I will accept almost anyone's friendship there and respond to messages and things like that as frequently as I can. And you can check me out on Instagram if you want, but you're going to get a lot of pictures of the golf course in my backyard and whiskey, but it's my Omaha life. So.
Perfect. I'll follow you there. Thanks, Jim.
All right. Thank you.
If you're looking for the #1 platform for all things commerce, there's no better choice. So definitely go check it out at salesforce.com/commerce.